the one secret weapon. I know you guys are waiting. You're probably on the edge of your car seats or your bench at work eating lunch right now saying, what's he going to say? What's he going to say? Well, it's a low angle block plane. I was messing around with my camera the other day and I changed the settings and I don't know what I had them on before. Rookie mistake. I can't believe I did that. Doug, sorry. But I'm trying to find the best settings for outside and inside. My podcast studio is obviously different than outside, and I don't know enough about it. So I was reading up a little bit and changing some things, and it's crazy how much stuff you can switch on all of this. There's a lot to know. Doug, I don't know how you do it. I don't know how any of you guys do it. It's just one little tweak changes so much. And I'm like, damn, this looks like dog crap. So I was messing around with that. I feel like my coloring is still blown out right now. So I have some more work to do, obviously. So if you're watching this on YouTube, I'm sorry that my complexion isn't perfect. But I'm working on it. I'm working on getting this camera a little bit better for you all to see my beautiful, beautiful face. And it's a lot of work. It's hard. And then like the lighting changes, even though I have my podcast studio blacked out, like there is coloring changes because there is some light coming in. So one day I look fine, and then the next day I look like I got a spray tan. So I'm trying to figure out a setting that works for everything, and it's proving to be quite difficult, especially when I don't know what the heck I'm doing. And so the way I learn is I have to understand how something works, right? So if a camera, like they can just tell me to change a setting and I can do that, obviously. But if I don't understand what that change does or how it works, I won't retain that information. So I won't understand, like when it happens again, I won't be like, wow, my coloring's weird. What button did I press? But if I understand why it's weird and like how to fix it, then I'll remember how to do it, which is easier when it's something that comes naturally to you, like carpentry or building. But when it's stuff like this or technology based, I always say I'm technologically inept. You know what? My coloring's also probably off because I have a fluorescent orange hat on, um, hiding my crazy hair today. But there's more important things to talk about. I had a really nice phone call with a guy named Victor today, who has he's an electrician, and just struggling to find some good fit with general contractors that he can work for. And I obviously understand the struggle. I have trouble finding good subs and good vendors, and it's hard for me to recommend good contractors. And I think it would be very, very difficult to be a subcontractor because you are taking your business, your livelihood, your reputation, and you're putting it in the hands of somebody else and hoping that they manage that job correctly to allow you to do your best work and to allow you to um, do a good job for the customer, for them, and to make your money, all while remaining behind the curtain and not really being customer facing. So a poor general contractor, you're part of that team, and it can be a bad reflection on you. And those can be frustrating relationships. So um, I think that he doesn't realize his business is in a really good place, and I think that he has opportunity to grow some if he wants to, or continue to be profitable right where he is. Um, but it was an interesting call. Nice guy. I wish him the best. But if you guys want to schedule a consulting call with me, a lot of times there's glaring issues. Sometimes we'll have to do a little bit more digging as to figure out where we need to go. Again, I think that Victor maybe was looking for some affirmation that what he was doing was right or what his options are. But I think that he has a pretty good idea of where things stand and what's a good fit for him. And sometimes just the truth of the matter is difficult to accept, and you're looking for some greener pastures, or the proverbial greener grass on the other side, and it's not necessarily always there. So sometimes it's just a reflection on what is happening and that you are doing your best and you're actually in a good position. But if you guys want to hop on a consulting call or you want to talk about anything business wise, what I do, if you want some insight into my business, how I operate, how I make money, how I do something, whether it's business related, trade related, shoot me an email, Tyler at trghomeconcepts.com. I generally book those calls during podcast day in the mornings, which would be Tuesdays. So if you have some time Tuesday, you want to hop on a phone call and discuss business, life, whatever that may be, shoot me an email, Tyler at trghomeconcepts.com, and we'll figure out how to make that happen for you. I'll tell you how I schedule it, what the rate is, all that stuff, and hopefully get you up on your feet and making some money. Today's podcast, which is brought to you by Kuiken Brothers and Andersen Windows. You guys should know how to spell that by now, right? It's Kuiken Brothers.com and Andersen, Andersen, Windows.com. If you guys need windows, if you need doors, obviously, we have a great partnership with Andersen Windows and Doors. I use their product. I enjoy their product. What I like best is the customer service. As with anything, sometimes things come damaged. There's issues with product, but I've always been able to get them remediated quickly and get answers from Andersen. So to me, a lot of times there may be comparable products, comparable price points, but the customer service and the team behind those products will make a huge difference for me. And it's the same thing for Kuiken Brothers. I personally know Ryan, just like I personally know some people at Andersen, which is important to have that rapport and those relationships with people. But I know if there's an issue that the sales team over at Kuiken Brothers, my main man Matt Gaff over there, Gaffney, Gaff Daddy. He'll do whatever he needs to get me set up or fix any mistakes or just get me something in a pinch. So to me, that's where the value lies with these companies. Lumber yards a lot of times carry the same stuff, but it's who's going to help you, who's going to pick up the phone call, who's going to make right a wrong. They do and are the only ones who carry their traditional molding collection. So they not all lumber yards are equal, but right, if you put everyone on a equal slate and everyone had the same product, it comes down to the people behind the companies. And for both these companies, I stand behind them. They stand behind me. So thanks to Andersen and thanks to Kuiken Brothers and thanks for everyone behind those companies. Ellie, you've been huge, so we appreciate it. Elliot Andersen. All right, guys, on to the podcast. So this podcast, hop on the website, moderncraftsman.co, and read the blog post, share the blog post, repost the blog post. Just check out the blog post. It's different than the podcast, and you might enjoy it if you need a little bit of reading. Maybe if you read when you go to the bathroom, maybe if you read when you go to sleep. It might be a change of pace for you. All right. So this blog, 50, that's a big number, halfway to 100. It is called A Trim Carpenter's Secret Weapon. It's not a dangerous weapon. I guess it could be dangerous. So I'm not, contrary to what people may believe, I'm not a huge tool snob. I've made do with inexpensive tools. I still am running the same pretty much bare bones DeWalt 10-inch table saw that I got when I started business 14 years ago, which I'm looking to switch out to another one that I bought that was, $250 back then. There's tools that I use, nail guns that I use that aren't anything super crazy, super expensive. They get the job done. There's some tools that I use that aren't necessary. They might just make my job more enjoyable, a little bit easier, a little bit cleaner, healthier, safer, but you can get by with other tools. I like tool brands that that stand behind me, that supply a product that holds up, but I have my preferences, but I'm not a huge snob. I don't need the absolute best of everything in my shop and in my truck. And I may do for a long time without it. I'm in a position now where I can afford and get some nicer tools, but that's not to say that everyone needs them and that I'm a snob and I won't work without them, because I did for a long time. Um, I also am not a huge vintage tool snob. There's a lot of guys and girls out there that love the old equipment, restoring the old equipment, love hand tools, like to collect that type of stuff. Um, that's just not me. It's not anything I've ever been into. And again, nothing against that, but that's just not me. But this tool that I believe is a secret weapon, um, is more of a hand tool. So a lot of people do buy these, restore these, get them up and working again. But for me, I don't need a ton of these. I don't need all different types of these, but the one secret weapon. I know you guys are waiting. You're probably on the edge of your car seats or your bench at work, eating lunch right now, saying, "What's he gonna say? What's he gonna say?" Well, it's a low angle block plane. Um, I keep one, a really small one. Um, I'm not loyal to any brand. I bought two Lee Nielsen block planes. It's a huge maker player in the game. Their shop is up in Maine, so they make a quality product. It's handmade, not necessarily mass produced. Excuse me here. I'm about to. God bless me. Um, but they make a nice product. I've never had any issues with them. There's a ton of other companies. Veritas, Stanley makes them. So the idea is to buy one that's well made, quality, accurate. If you're into buying old tools and restoring them, you can do the same thing with an old Stanley. Um, it's one of those tools that's very simple. There's not a lot of moving parts, so it needs to be maintained well. It needs to be flat. Your irons need to be sharp. And if it's working well, it should be effortless. If it's not working well, or it's not a high quality, or it's not maintained properly, you're going to be like, what the hell was Tyler talking about? This thing sucks. I'm just going to make the trips back and forth to the saw. But this is a tool that I hang off my belt when doing trim carpentry, and I really won't do without one at this point. I think it was $150 when I bought it. You should buy the tools and the sharpening guides and all that stuff, the stones to resharpen and dress your edges. I know you can get leather blocks that you can kind of tune them during the day. The oil to keep them from rusting if they're staying out in your truck. I keep mine in a sock so that it doesn't sweat and get rusty. Um, but I have two. I have a larger one with an adjustable mouth, and I have the smaller one, the little brass one, the gold brass, not the white brass or bronze. Um, I really like it. It's super convenient. It's not, these low. So the difference between a block plane and a bench plane, when you think of a plane, most people are probably thinking in their heads like the larger planes that you see. They're long, they're flat, use two hands on them, and you're holding that plane and you're shooting it down a board, and you're using it typically to dress edges or flatten lumber. A lot of the very old carpentry logos and symbols would have the woodworker on a with a bench top, or a vise, a soft jaws vise, and they're planing lumber with the hand plane. These aren't them. They're not big. They're small. I think my one might be 6 inches. The other one might be 4 inches. They're not for planing stuff flat. Um, so a bench plane is going to have the difference between a bench plane and a block plane. A block plane is going to have the bevel the opposite way. It's a little less common. A low angle block plane, the same thing, but the block plane has an upward facing angle. So on a bench plane, the angle's facing the opposite way. So depending on what angle that iron is sitting at doesn't really affect the way that it cuts. With the way a bench plane is set up with the upward facing angle, there's a really um obviously you're working just with the tip of that iron, but then however you adjust the bed of that plane is going to adjust the cutting angle. So some companies have, a standard block plane and then a low angle block plane, and they're looking to cut at 37 degrees. A bench plane typically is like 45 degrees. So what's the difference there with that? um the best way for me to illustrate this if you're unfamiliar with a block plane or how it works. So it's not for shooting long boards or flattening long boards. A lot of times it's for cutting a cross grain or adjusting a miter, um, cutting against the grain. And the lower angle there makes it easier, less effort, cleaner, less chance of tear out. And the best way for me to really illustrate this to you on a podcast would be if you're holding a chisel at 45 degrees to a piece of wood. Um, it's going to want to dig into that wood pretty aggressively, and it will take off more material, but you're going to have a little bit more oomph behind that. If you were to drop that chisel down to a 37-degree angle to the board that you're working on, it's going to take off a little less material, a little less aggressive, but it's also going to be easier to push that to take off material. So where that really comes into play, not as much going with the grain, but against the grain, right? A less aggressive angle is going to make it easier to push that when the grain's not working with you. So against the grain, it's going to provide less tear out. You're going to be um, depending on how wide you open the mouth of that plane, you're going to be taking off less material, less aggressive. It's going to be cleaner, less tear out, and really give you an opportunity with the way that that iron and the bevel is shaping, facing, and how you can put a secondary bevel on this upward facing iron. It really allows you to be able to cut against the grain and adjust miters and cut cross grain. Um, you can cut lengthwise on wood or with the grain with these. They're not typically that long, so it's going to contour with the surface, and it's not necessarily for flattening things. You can I'll use mine to bevel the ends of wood. But say you have a corner, right, and you're looking to put a chamfer and it's a 1x4. When you're going with the grain, you can still use this plane to chamfer the corner of that board, but where it's going to work better than another plane, right? You could use a bench plane there too. Where this is going to work better is when you go across the chamfer the end grain of that wood. This is going to be a lot cleaner and a lot easier to that 3.5 inch side to chamfer that, and that's where this plane really shines. So what I use mine for, I'm keeping it on my belt. I'm using it. um, so people say you use a plane to adjust your miter. So typically, I'm not using this to adjust the actual angle of my miter. If I miss the mark and it needs to be 43 degrees and I made it 45, I'm not going to sit there and I'm not going to dig out this miter. It's easier for me to go back to the saw, adjust the cut, and it's more accurate. It's going to be cleaner. Where I'm going to use this to adjust the miter is on the back side of that miter, right? So you have the finished surface. If it's painted, it would be the primed side, and then you have the internal wood. I'm going to use that to remove stock on the inside of that, where you're looking to roll a piece of molding against the wall. Another place that I use this a ton is when I'm installing wainscoting. If it's a panel detail and there's a panel molding on the inside of the 1x stock, and I'm pre-cutting all of that stuff, right? And if one panel is slightly off by a 16th of an inch, an eighth an inch, because it got assembled and just skewed or not perfect 90 degrees, when you cut these small moldings and they're delicate moldings and they have a really sharp point and you want to spring fit them in place, they'll go in even if they're 3/16 of an inch long. And what happens is that miter just pushes into the adjoining board because it's so sharp and it's so soft and delicate. So when you go to put the next piece in, the one miter is too far into the corner and the other one can't go into that corner because it's hitting the other piece. So now your toe isn't lining up, and that transfers to your heel. So on the inside of that piece of molding, on the miter, you have the heel that's sticking out past the other heel. So instead of going to the saw and adjusting that angle, I'll take my block plane and like the first 6 inches of that piece on the backside that's up against the paneling, or sorry, the rail and style, I'll plane the back of that for like 6 inches or so, and I'll take, if it's a 16th and eighth of an inch off, So it's basically making that molding. If it was an inch and a quarter wide, I'll take it down to an inch and an eighth wide. And that allows that piece of molding to tuck in further and then go into that miter more. So I'm actually shortening the toe side of that miter and making that narrower. So now my heel lines up and it's less noticeable. When you're pre-cutting all these pieces, excuse me, when you're pre-cutting all these pieces, not everyone's going to fit. And if I don't have to go to the table saw to trim the back of these off, or if I don't have to go and recut this shorter, or I could just spring a piece in and say, hey, I can fit with my plane the next, I'm going to save myself not only time, but just energy getting up and going back and forth to the saw. A lot of times I add this molding and these panels to occupied homes. So my saw's out front. So if I have to go out every single time, I have to fine tune a miter, or right, sometimes this molding's different thicknesses. So I'm going to plane off the back to get the face of the miter to flush up right in the corner, where you're not going to see it, or I have to roll something. It saves me so much time. The other place where I'll use this a lot is scribing molding. So my first putt, if I have a door casing that's up against a wall, if I have crown molding on a funky ceiling, if I have baseboard that's going in without shoe molding or quarter round or a transitional molding on it, I'll mark my scribe line. I'll mark my scribe line, and then we have a snow day at school today, or from home from school today. That was a child who fell. We have a snow day today, so all the kids are home and all the neighbors' kids are at the house. So now we have kids in my podcast studio. So where was I? I'm very distracted by this, if you can't tell. So right, if my first putt on this, with any sort of a scribe is going to be to take it on my table. So I mark my scribe, pencil, blade, whatever you use, and then I take it to my table saw and I bevel that table saw to 15 degrees, 20 degrees, whatever it may be. And then I'm pulling off most of the meat on that. If it's something that's getting caulked in, I know I could probably be good with just my table saw, and any little inconsistencies are going to get caulked and painted. No harm, no foul. If it is pre-finished, if it's stain grade, something that needs to be a little bit tighter against a hardwood floor that we're not going to caulk, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to first put it on my table saw, get it as close as I can, and then maybe I use a belt sander. Maybe I use an RAS. Hold on one second. Let's start that over. So if it's something that's stain grade, if it's pre-finished right in a kitchen cabinet, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to use my table saw. I'm going to back bevel that. I'm going to take off most of the material, and then I'll use an RAS or my hand plane or a belt sander, and I'm going to cheat up to that line as close as possible. Then I'm going to bring that piece to wherever I'm fitting it and see if it fits. If I don't have a block plane on me at this point, any little inconsistencies, assuming it's close at this point, I have to go back to the saw. I have to rescribe, go back to the saw. I'll have to kind of mark and guess where I think it's going to be, and then I'll have to get my tools out and readjust that scribe and fine tune that. So that then requires another trip back to where I'm working and hoping that I marked it correctly. Maybe I didn't take off quite enough, or I didn't blend where I was going from my scribe to non-scribe, so I have to go back to the saw. So this is where, for me, especially on pre-finished stuff, this hand plane, this low angle block plane really comes in, because I can stay at my work area and just tweak every little scribe, just the little areas where it's like, oh, there's a little hump here, and tweak this and take a little more off. The one spot which you can learn to work around when you're using this to scribe stuff is when you didn't take off enough, and you have to kind of make what would be like a concave area in the trim, because you can tilt the block plane on an angle and take off whatever you need to, but generally it's not going to do curves as well as a grinder or a belt sander, where you can really hone your grinding or material removal area down to an inch and a half, a 2.5, and you can really do all these irregular shapes with it. So a block plane even this small 4-inch block plane, you're using the base of it to guide what you are planing. And yeah, you can turn that sideways. And a lot of times, my buddy Tyler taught me this when using it, that you are using these on an angle. You're skewing the iron on an angle, so it's slicing and working through the material in a cleaner way, right? If you were carving something with a knife, you're going to want to hold that knife on an angle and use the knife and the motion of the knife, here look, we'll show you, to go on an angle through it. It's the same thing with a block plane. You want to have that slightly skewed on an angle to the piece you're working on to take the material off, rather than going at it perfectly parallel, where you're using the whole width of the blade to start the cutting and tailor and alter the cutting. So you're always turning this plane to take off more, to take off less, and you can turn this, closer to perpendicular to the piece that you're working if you really want to work on a very small area, but you're still limited to the curves that you can with a metal tool that's flat and straight and rigid. So that's the one place that it's not amazing. Um, but for everything else, it's super convenient. It saves me a ton of time. It saves me a ton of trips back and forth to the saw. So this for me is something that is always on my belt when I'm doing finished carpentry. If I had to buy a present for somebody who was working underneath me, who was a trim carpenter, for 150, 200 bucks, this is a no-brainer. A really great tool that I use all the time. And with this, again, you can pick your poison. You can buy a old block plane at a yard sale and restore it if that's what you're into. For me, for 150 to $250, and that not being something that I really enjoy doing, to buy one for 25, 50 bucks and restore it just doesn't make that much sense. I'd rather start fresh and start new, and especially when you're first getting into this, to understand how they work and what is flat and relative um, to what you're working with, and how to keep the sole of the plane flat, and how to sharpen your blades. If you're starting with something that's sharp, it's going to be a lot easier than starting with something that's dull and trying to get your edge and get your angle set correctly and learn how to do secondary angles and all that stuff. So it's easier to start with something new for me. Um, that being said, get yourself all of the tools you need to maintain these, because if they're not sharp, if they're not flat, if the depth adjustment or the mouth of the plane is difficult to adjust and open, it's just, you're not going to like the tool. It's going to be a pain in the ass. You're going to toss it. So get everything that you need to maintain the tool. The other thing to note is, it's just like anything else. The more more frequent, smaller maintenance is going to pay dividends. If it's the same thing as a lawnmower blade, right? If you take your lawnmower blades off and you fine tune them and sharpen them every month or so, you're going to be able to use those blades for a really long time, and it's not going to be such a hassle to sharpen them. If you use them for a season and then trying to sharpen them afterwards, you're either going to have to toss them, or it's going to take so much work to get that edge right and get them balanced that it's not going to be worth the cost of new blades. Just like a chef's knife, anything else, right? They have a sharpener right in the kitchen, and they're always sharpening and maintaining that edge. And a little bit goes a long way there, right? It's going to be easier to make a couple passes on a stone every few days that you're using this, or every few weeks, however often you use it, and keep that blade sharp, than to let it go completely dull and then have to redo your edges entirely. So that's definitely something to keep in mind. There's also the saying that, like, the most dull blade, or the most dangerous blade, is a dull blade, and that's the same thing with a hand plane, a drill bit, utility knife, right? These things should be sharp. They shouldn't require that much effort. If you're putting that much effort into it, something's wrong, and it's very dangerous, because when you're putting that much force behind a dull blade and then you slip with it, it's going to do a lot of damage. So a nice, sharp, flat plane is going to be safer and make your job and this entire process a lot easier and far more enjoyable for you. So that is my secret weapon for a trim carpenter. If you don't have one, again, check it out. I love a low angle block plane better than a standard block plane. For me, for what I do, again, I'm not using it for anything more than just a little bit of fine tuning here and there and save me some trips back to the saw. There's times where it's too much work for a block plane. I'm back to the saw anyway, but this is for the times where it's like, yeah, I just need to fine tune this. It's going to make a better joint. It's going to give me a stronger glue joint, or it's just going to make me be able to roll a piece of molding or square up the inside or the heel of a miter. So it's really just for those little things where you're up on a ladder and I don't have to get down or hand a piece down and wait to cut something. I can just make the adjustment that I need to and keep moving. So again, I have some Lee Nielsen block planes, low angle block planes. I'm not an expert by any means, which is probably why I only have these small block planes and nothing crazy. But check them out. If you're a trim carpenter, if you're a remodeler, it's a good tool to have. So hopefully this is some helpful wisdom for you. I didn't get one until maybe 5 or so years ago, and I can't imagine living without it on my tool belt now. It's really, I like the small one. It's really comfortable in hand. It does what I need it to do. If I need the bigger one, I have it, but it's heavier. I just like the convenience of having the really small one. So check them out. Let me know what you think. If you have any other little tools like that that are handy, let me know. Hop on the website, buy some pencils, buy some notebooks. Let's see. We don't have any shirts right now. Go on iTunes, leave a review, patronize our sponsors, Andersen, Kuiken Brothers, and spread the word. And if you want to schedule a consulting call, shoot me an email. All right, guys, I'll catch you next week. Thank you.